Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to speak in support of Bill C-45, an act respecting cannabis, and to amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, the Criminal Code, and other acts. I think all members will agree that protecting the health and safety of Canadians is a key priority for all orders of government in Canada. With this in mind, on April 13, 2017, Bill C-45 was introduced in this House. Its goal is the creation of a strict national framework for controlling the production, distribution, sale, and possession of cannabis in Canada. The bill would provide legal access to cannabis where adults could obtain it through an appropriate legal framework, sourced from a strictly regulated industry or by growing it safely and in limited amounts at home. Le projet de loi établirait également.
The bill would also establish controls to protect youth, including prohibition from selling cannabis anyone under 18 years of age, as well as restrictions on marketing and other promotional activities that target youth.
Growers and manufacturers of cannabis would require a federal license and be subject to strict oversight regime intended to control product safety and quality and to prevent diversion to the illegal market. The effective oversight and control of cannabis cannot be achieved through working in isolation from our partners in the provinces, territories, and municipalities. From the outset, our government has been clear that the control and regulation of cannabis requires a pan-Canadian approach involving all orders of government at all stages of development and implementation. This reality is reflected in the important role that our provincial and territorial partners played in the work of the Task Force on cannabis legalization and regulation. The task force was established in June 2016 with a mandate to provide advice to the federal government on how to legalize, strictly regulate, and restrict access to cannabis. Input from the provinces and territories, as well as from Indigenous communities, was essential to the successful work of the task force. The provinces and territories nominated experts to serve on the task force and made suggestions as to who should be consulted. They met, these individuals met with the task force and shared their views on cannabis legalization and regulation and how best to achieve our shared objectives of better protecting public health and safety. Il ne devrait pas être étonnant que
It should not be surprising that the provincial and territorial advice has helped to develop many provisions of Bill C-45.
Consistent with the task force report, Bill C-45 proposes a shared framework for the control and regulation of cannabis that would require ongoing federal, provincial, and territorial collaboration. The bill sets out clear controls and standards around cannabis and provides flexibility for each government to work within their own jurisdictional authority and experience. Those who are best placed to implement each aspect of the framework would do so. At this time, I would like to explain how the various roles and responsibilities would be shared between our governments, beginning with the federal role. Bill C-45 proposes that the federal government would be responsible for establishing and maintaining a national framework for regulating the production of cannabis, setting standards for health and safety, and establishing criminal prohibitions. This would include establishing restrictions on adult access to cannabis and establishing serious criminal penalties for those operating outside of the legal system. Creating rules to limit how cannabis or cannabis accessories could be promoted, packaged, labeled, and displayed that would be in line with the rules in place for tobacco products. Instituting a federal licensing regime for cannabis production that would draw on lessons learned from the current system for access to cannabis for medical purposes. Establishing industry-wide rules and standards for example, serving sizes or potency limits, as well as the tracking of cannabis to prevent diversion to the illegal market. Creating minimum federal conditions to provide a national framework to protect public health and public safety, and enforcing cannabis importation and exportation prohibitions at the border except when legally authorized. En même temps, le projet de loi.
At the same time, Bill C-45 recognizes that the provinces and territories, as well as municipalities, have an important role to play in the new system.
The legislation would respect that provinces and territories, together with municipalities, have the authority to tailor certain rules in their own jurisdictions and enforce them through a range of tools, including administrative sanctions. Consistent with the recommendations from the task force, the provinces and territories working with municipalities would be able to establish rules around where cannabis-based businesses could be located within a community and also where cannabis could be consumed in public. Provinces and territories could also set additional requirements to address issues of local concern. For example, provincial and territorial legislatures would have the authority to set a higher minimum age for cannabis possession. Provinces and territories could also set more restrictive limits on possession or personal cultivation, including lowering the number of plants or restricting where they may be cultivated. Thus, Bill C-45 is drafted in such a way as to provide the provinces and territories with the ability to establish stricter rules under their own authorities. We are pleased to see that the provinces and territories are already taking action to prepare for legalization and regulation of cannabis. From coast to coast to coast, provinces and territories are continuing the conversation with Canadians about how best to regulate the sale and distribution of cannabis in their towns, cities, and communities. While provinces and territories will decide on a system that responds to their particular circumstances, it is clear that all jurisdictions share our government's responsibilities. Keeping cannabis out of the hands of youth and shutting out organized crime and protecting public health and safety. This is true for all orders of government. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. Honorable Député, the Honorable.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague across the way there from Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, and having served with him on the Committee of Justice and Human Rights, and being together with him one of the only two non-lawyers on the committee, I know that he's a very common sense and practical kind of person, and so my question to him would be on this legislation here. Does the legislation really meet the objectives that the Liberals have stated it is, and that's to minimize the access that youth will have to cannabis? Does allowing every household in Canada to have 4 mature marijuana plants in there, does he really believe that this will minimize the exposure that youth have and the access that they have to cannabis?
The Honourable Member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam.
I thank the honourable member from Provincial for his question. And I also appreciate serving on the Justice and Human Rights Committee with him. Yes, in answer to his question, will it serve the needs of protecting Canadians, protecting youth? Absolutely. It also recognizes the role of parental responsibility in their own households. In the same way that parents and adults in a household now protect their children from access to alcohol that may be widely present in the home. If there is cannabis present in the home, if they are growing cannabis in the home or whatever, it still is part of parental responsibility to maintain control of that in a responsible way as they look after their children as they will do throughout their lives. Thank you.
And comments? The honourable member for Kootenay, Columbia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague from Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, for his speech. I lived in Lincoln Park and Port Coquitlam for 10 years and know how important this issue, I still have friends that live there, is to the people of Port Coquitlam. In my own riding, I held a town hall about a year ago, and 3,300 people stayed on the phone for an hour to learn about this initiative and, of course, to express some of their concerns. And about a year ago, I met with the Canadian Nurses Association and asked one of the nurses there, so what do you think about legalization of marijuana and some of the concerns? I appreciate that the member talked first and foremost about safety. And she said, well, I can tell you this, that in Colorado, where marijuana has now been legal for a couple of years, she has a friend that works in emergency rooms in a hospital in Colorado. And this friend of hers said the number one thing bringing people through the doors now of emergency rooms in Colorado is related to marijuana, either from impaired accidents, both automobile and otherwise, and paranoia from combining mental health prescription drugs with marijuana. And so I would like to ask the member, do you feel comfortable that the proposal you have forward will actually keep Canadians safe?
I just want to remind the member that he's to address the question to the chair and not to the individual member. The honourable member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the member for his question. Yes, this legislation will keep Canadians safe in many respects, in many ways. For example, currently, marijuana is very widely used among our youth. Canada has one of the highest per capita rates of marijuana use among youth than any developed country. The problem with that is that the marijuana they're getting is from an unknown source of unknown potency and unknown quality. And it also it puts them into contact with the black market, which is a gateway to many other serious drugs and serious substances. So by providing a controlled source of qualified, of marijuana that its provenance, its potency, and its purity is known, will help that situation, but it will also provide a way for people to buy and sell it legally, controlled in the same way that tobacco is, in a similar way as tobacco is, which the biggest effort to keep children out of using marijuana is going to be around education, not by prohibition, and not by threatening them with some sort of criminal prohibition. It devolves upon all the adults in the equation to look after the children.